Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. This is Jay from Coding with Jaybird, where I upload weekly tutorials to help build your confidence in coding. Today we're going to have a look at the JavaScript window object. Let's get started, shall we? Here in Visual Studio Code, I've opened up my window object project folder, and all I have going on in here is a main.js that I've linked to. And in this HTML file, what I have is a few properties, and they each have some span tags with IDs. And what I plan to do is target these IDs and output some results from JavaScript here in this position. So here on the right, you can see in the browser, I have like inner height, inner width, and so on. And my goal is to explain some of the concepts of window object and then display the result here in the browser. All right, let's get started in the main.js file. So first things first, we're talking about the window object. Now, what is the window object? Well, the window object is actually part of what's called a browser object model. And in JavaScript, we have three main groups of built-in objects. So there are global JavaScript objects, there's the document object model, or the DOM, and lastly, the browser object model. Now, this browser object model creates a model of the browser tab or window, and we can represent the current browser window or the tab using what's called a window object in JavaScript. Now, this is the topmost object in the browser object model. Each window object has several properties and methods, and I'll cover some of the more commonly used ones in this tutorial. All right, let's start with our first one, which will be the inner window height and width. So what we can do is, using this window object, we can get the height of the window in pixels, not including the browser interface. So this particular window here on the right-hand side. So what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to target that ID. So document.getElementById. And I'm going to target the very first one here in my HTML file. So here in line 16, I'll target inner height, and then we'll continue down the rest of these as we go on. Okay, so the first one is going to be inner-height, and I want to replace its inner HTML with the result of the window object, and I'll use the dot notation to get its property, and the property we want is the inner height property. So when I save this, we can see we get 936. So that tells us that the height of this window on the right, so this Chrome browser window, not including the browser interface, is 936 pixels. Okay, now similarly, we can also get the width. So again, I'm going to target the inner-width ID, and I just want to replace its inner HTML with, I'll target the window object once again, and this time I'll look for the inner width property. And you can see here on the right that we get 625. So that tells us that the inner width of this browser window, not including the browser interface, so just the window itself with the content inside, is 625 pixels. Next, I'd like to talk about the user's entire screen height and width. Now we're able to access the user's entire screen dimensions, which can be pretty useful for creating custom applications. We can access the screen object, which is within the window object, and then get its height property. And this is the entire height of the user's screen. So if they have a laptop with a certain dimensions, we will see that. So here again, I'm going to target, so I'll say document.getElementById, and here I want to target the screen height, so ID of screen height. Okay, and I want to replace its inner HTML, which is an empty span tag right now, with the result from the window object. And within the window object, I'm going to target the screen object, which happens to have a property with the value of height, or the name of height. And when I save it, you can see we're getting a screen height of 982. And that's because I have a 14-inch MacBook Pro, which has a height or overall screen height of 982. Now, similarly, we can get the width. So again, I can say get element by ID. And again, I'm going to target the ID of screen dash, I think it was width. Yep, screen dash width, as you can see in line 19. And we'll make its inner HTML equal to the window object. And there we'll access the screen object and then its width property. And we can see that my entire screen is 1512 pixels. Now we can also have a look at the coordinates of where the window is relative to the entire screen. And we can do that with the screen X and the screen Y property. So let's practice this. We're going to say let's target the document, get element by ID, and this time the ID is called screen X, and then we'll get to Y next. So screen-X dot inner HTML. This part should be pretty easy for you all now. And now we're going to target the window object dot its screen X property. So again, using dot notation, we'll say dot screen X. And you can see I'm getting a screen coordinate of 10, 10. Now I know that this overall screen from left to right is 15, 12. So this 10, 10 makes sense because this top corner here is roughly around 1,000 pixels across. Now what if I were to move this over here all the way to the left and refresh the page? Now we can see that the X coordinate has changed to 0. So pretty neat. We can see where this window is floating around relative to the entire screen. And let's reload it, and we're back to 10, 12. Okay, now similarly, we can get the Y value, or the vertical value. And we're going to do this by targeting the window object once again, and using dot notation, we're going to target its screen Y property. And we can see that we get a vertical, or rather Y coordinate value of 38, and that's because of the browser interface on the top taking up a little bit of room. And if I were to move this further down and reload the page, we'll see we get 178. So it actually does work. It does tell you where it is relative to the screen. So let's kind of throw it all the way over here and see what do we get. Now we get an X of 0, and that's because I'm not quite at the left. Now if I actually get off the screen and reload, we're going to see a negative value. So that's interesting as well. So we get negative 49 because my window is slightly outside of my screen. All right, let's go put it back to where it was. Okay, so what do I want to talk about next? Well, I'd like to talk about the location property. Now the location property is also a property that belongs to the window object, and it returns the location object for the window, which contains information about the current URL. So whatever file path I may have up here in my URL. So let's target document.get element by ID, and this time I want to get the ID of location. And again, I'm going to access the window object, and within the window object using dot notation, I'm going to access the location property, which happens to also be an object. And once again, using dot notation, I can actually access the path name. Now this path name is the path name of my current URL that I'm using here on the right hand side. So when I save it, we can see window-object.html. And that's because this window-object.html file is the one that I'm loading in my Chrome browser using my live server. All right, that looks wonderful. Now let's say I was building an application where I wanted to know if the user had scrolled down in a page or across in a page. I can actually do that with my next property, or next two properties rather, and they're called page Y offset and page X offset. Okay, now these return the pixels that the current document has either scrolled vertically or horizontally from the upper left corner of the window. So the top left corner over here. All right, so let's once again say document.get element by ID. And this time the ID we want to target is the Y offset. And we'll replace its inner HTML with the result from the window object dot the page Y offset property. Okay, so I just saved it and I reloaded the page on the right. And if I scroll down, it's going to say the vertical scroll is 0. Now that's because I reloaded the page when my scroll bar was at the top. So now that I've scrolled all the way to the bottom, as you can see here from up and down, all the way to the bottom, if I reload this, we're going to get a value of 290. If I go up a little bit more and I reload it, now we can see 226. Okay, so that's how the vertical scroll works. Let's practice the same approach with the horizontal scroll. And once again, we're going to target this window object. And this time we're going to target its page X offset property. When I reload this here in the browser on the right, you're going to see that since I don't have any horizontal scroll right now, since my bar is all the way on the left here, I'm going to get an X scroll distance of 0. Now if I move it all the way to the right and reload the page, we see that the value goes up. It went up to 54.375. And we can also see that the Y scroll distance also changed because now I've scrolled down and it's at 290. So as you can see, window objects have many properties associated with them. They also have methods that we can apply to them. So one method that I want to show you, it's a common method, and that's the alert method. So we're used to usually just putting alert in JavaScript, but you can actually reference it with the window object as well. So we'll say window.alert. And let's say I just want to alert to the user, hello user. And there you can see on the right, we get this alert popping up saying hello user. Now, all those times that we've been doing console.logs, we haven't realized that we're actually accessing the console object, which happens to be a property of the window object. So we can also go ahead and write window dot, and now we can target the console property, which happens to be an object. And again, using the dot notation, access the log method. And here I can just output something to the console saying, I am in the console. And of course I save it and I can see my pop-up coming up again. So there's my alert. And if I open up my DevTools, I can see I am in the console. Perfect. All right, that wraps up my video on window objects in JavaScript. I hope you've enjoyed my video so far. If you have, please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button so you can stay up to date with new videos that come out every week. Until next week, keep on coding.